Hello, and welcome back to JC's Writing Advice. I'm JC Bybee, indie author, a writer coach, and YouTuber. And today we're going to go back into talking about characters. Last video we talked about characters that were morally gray. And that led me to wanting to talk about character motivations and why they're important. But before we get to the video topic, if you like what you see here, like what I say, please feel free to, do the algorithm dance, like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment if you have a video you'd like me to address or a topic you'd like me to go over. Also, you can find all of my books and my writing coaching services at jcbybee.com. You can also support me on Patreon, where you can help me buy a chair that doesn't squeak really bad. Anyway, those will all be linked down below in the description, and without further ado, let's get into it. So, understanding what drives your characters. What is a motivation? That's that. It's the primary reason your character gets out of bed in the morning. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the complexity of motivations, but surface level stuff is where we're going to start. The surface level thing is what your readers initially pick up on about your protagonist or your main character or whatever you want to call them. It's an easy, straightforward way of understanding why they do what they do. Morally gray is what we talked about last time, and they have motivations that are clear to them, but aren't always clear to the other characters in the story, or even the reader at times. With other characters, it's usually a good idea to let the reader know why your protagonist is doing what they're doing. Sometimes you can even, depending on your frame narrative and the type of story you're writing, you can make it very clear what the villain or the bad guy or the antagonist is motivated by. It all depends on the type of story you're telling. Epic fantasy, it tends to be, clashes of good versus evil. The good guys are doing good because they know it's the right thing, and the bad guy is doing bad things, generally speaking, because they're evil. They want certain things. Usually it's to rule or to destroy. So, on that note, what are some common motivations? Some common ones are money, power, fame, glory, family, safety, revenge, food, shelter, a pet, things that feel like they're humdrum common things. Things that people in the real world talk about all the time and say that this is what drives me. This is why I get out of bed in the morning. This is what makes me do what I do. Religion's another one that is a big driving force for people. And if you're going to use any of these straightforward motivations, that's fine. The big difference is the big thing you want to take in consideration, not difference, the thing you want to consider is how is it going to present in whatever character it presents in. For example, I will go back to Han Solo. In Star Wars, he is motivated by self-interest, and that self-interest expresses as, I need the money to pay off Jabba so he doesn't kill me. It's established early on, right after he makes the deal with Luke and Obi-Wan to transport him where they need to go. He realizes he's going to get a huge payday. He thinks he's set. Bounty hunter shows up. He shoots and kills the bounty hunter. He is motivated by self-interest at the beginning. And we see his motivation change as he discovers people outside of himself, essentially. Another good motivator, or another good person who, let me think, I'm trying to think of some good examples. A lot of characters in epic fantasy are bound by duty. duty is what pushes them to do what they do. They feel like it's their responsibility to answer the call. And you can do that. Like I said, it's very straightforward motivations. You want to make sure you avoid falling into the cliches of money, power, fame, glory, family, whatever. In the, let's see here. Let's see, Star Wars game. There we go. Brain stopped for a second. Jedi. I can't remember the title of it. It's not Jedi Fallen Order. Maybe it's Jedi Survivor? I don't remember. It's the second one in the series. You encounter a character, spoiler alert, by the way, that for the brunt of the game, you view him as an ally. And he's helping you out. Some revelations show up, and you find out that he is strongly motivated by the desire to keep his daughter, his remaining family, safe. So much so that he betrays the rebellion, he betrays the Jedi Order, he betrays your main character, everything in order to keep his daughter safe. So much so that it's starting to turn him to the dark side. And that desire to protect actually becomes a flaw in him because it becomes an obsession. And that's a different video, but these motivations can become obsessions. And when they become obsessions, generally speaking, that's when you're looking at your character starting to walk the line between good and bad, self-preservation and nihilism, or what have you. On that note, some uncommon motivations. Nihilism, hate. Some people say hate's a super common motivation. A lot of times what people view as hate or pass off cheaply as hate is deeply rooted fear or other things. It's rare to find somebody who is genuinely motivated purely by hate. Apathy. I just don't care, and that is a motivator. Oddly enough, for all that it seems to be the opposite of what, apathy and motivation seem to be, opposites of each other, but the desire not to do anything can be a motivation. And then altruism. That is one that is rarely used properly. Most of the time, in my experience with fiction, characters that are altruistic, generally speaking, have ulterior motives. They're not just altruistic. And so if you want to do something that would be genuinely new and different, have a character that's generally altruistic. Have somebody that their sole motivation is the benefit of other people. And readers would not know what to do with that. They would probably spend the entire book suspecting them of something terrible, which could make it for an interesting story, because there's a subversion, expectations being subverted, and then there's expectations expecting to be subverted and then not, which is a subversion in and of itself. Anyway, so this goes into our next talking about altruism, goes into why. Why does this character do what they do? Is there a specific event in their life? The fun one, because it's easy pathos, is childhood trauma. Lost a family member, lost a best friend, lost a dog, stuff like that. It's easy pathos, but it's easy pathos because so many people understand it and can grab onto it and relate to it. Another one is the history, your family's history. What did their family go through? What do they know about their history, and maybe that finding out what their history is what drives them. Finding out, the truth. Another reason why they might act that way is their belief system, their religion, whatever they were raised to believe or not believe, can motivate a character to act one way or another. And it leads to an opportunity to challenge their beliefs, to challenge their motivations, to challenge their drives, to give them a chance to question them. Do they stick to their guns, or do they change their thinking? So that is one of the more important things to keep in mind as a writer, because you need to understand why your character has their motivation. Why do they want money? Why do they want power? Why do they want security? Why do they want a family? Why? And you don't necessarily have to just dump that on the reader. You don't want to, in fact, just dump it on the reader. You want to be able to tell the story to reveal why they act the way they act. That way it feels rewarding to the reader to have read and to follow the clues and to get the answers. And you don't always have to give all the answers. Answering too many questions or answering all the questions can sometimes work against you. You say, what do you mean that can work against me? Well, if you pace it wrong and you answer all the questions before the end of the story, your reader's going to lose interest. But at the same time, if you're not answering enough questions or the right questions soon enough, your reader's also going to lose interest, because they're going to feel frustrated because their needs as a reader aren't being met by your story. It's something to consider when you're thinking about, character motivations, for example. How do they serve the overarching plot? And how is that going to drive the events of the story? For example, again, my main character in Hero Unit, Ace. Ace is, as I've said, the equivalent of Superman. Her powers are a little bit different in some aspects. Because again, I don't want people to just read her and think, oh, this is just Superman. They probably will, but anyway. Ace is motivated by very specific things. And one of those things is she has a desire to protect her family, to keep her family safe. And it's not just her blood relatives, which they are important. They are part of that circle, but it's anybody that she has subconsciously claimed as a part of her family. And she doesn't necessarily realize that that's what she's doing. And another thing that motivates her on top of this is responsible use of her powers. She is so much stronger than every other exceptional in the series. So much more capable that she is constantly aware of how her actions and how her use of power affects everybody else around her, for good or for bad. And so it's about how does she use her power in such a way that it doesn't harm other people, but it also allows her to do her job. And I try to make a lot of the cases, and I'm not as successful as this as I would like to be, but I'm trying to make the cases less about Ace's ability to punch something really hard and more about actually having to do police work. But anyway. And so that leads to the question, are your characters aware of their motivations? And maybe this desire for power, or this desire for money, or this desire for whatever is something they want to change. And that could be a part of the driver of the story. Part of why they're doing what they're doing is because I don't want to be like my dad, who's a filthy rich aristocrat and treats people like garbage. Just as an easy through line on that. And is it difficult for them to change? Is it, easy? Because if it's easy, not really interesting. If it's a struggle, if it's something that they have to work for and something that they have to earn, that gives us a more interesting story. And that leads us to this one. Is the motivation that we see from the character as the reader the truth? In shout out to the Eagle Mountain Writers Conference that I often attend and teach at, there was a class this last year on writing authentic YA by Taylor A. Jenkins, and she did a really good job pointing out to, and I can't remember the exact phrasing, and I don't want to rip off what she was talking about, but understanding your character's ultimate why. Is this surface level motivation that we see the actual reason why they do things? Is it their actual motivation? Is it their actual drive? And I will say that it's probably not often that character's actual motivation, their actual drive. Because most people don't always I'm struggling a little bit. Most people don't genuinely understand what motivates them. They think they do, but a lot of people don't introspect enough to realize that this isn't actually why I go to work. This isn't actually why I do the things I do. It's actually something else. So if you're going to have a motivation shift or a confrontation with oneself, you need to make sure that it makes sense. Drop the hints along the way so that when the reader reads it, they're like, oh, that makes more sense. Also, you look back into the morally gray character section and realize that a lot of times the morally gray characters have these secondary motivations. What really drives them? What is the real reason they're doing what they're doing? And when that's revealed, it makes sense why they did this or why they did this. So you got to be careful if you're going to have one of those moments of reflection, of vulnerability, of realizing why they do what they do. Because it can feel very rewarding to the reader, that they've paid attention, that they've followed the story. Or it can feel kind of like a cheap cop-out. And I can think of a few off the top of my head. I'm not going to do it because last time I harped a little too much on something that bothered me. So I'm going to shy away from that this time. And then overall, all of this is all coming down to, how do these drives and motivations serve the narrative? If it doesn't serve the narrative, why is it what motivates them? Because if it's not serving the narrative, it's not relevant to the story. It doesn't give the reader a good payoff because it might not even get a payoff. So whatever you're doing, like I say, with Ace is, for all intents and purposes, a police officer. And so her desire to protect and her desire to use her power responsibly fits into that narrative. Aurora, my main character in the Telvanna Mysteries, she is one of the few immortals that has lived from the creation of the world to the present day in this series. It's about 15,000 years. And her motivations are very much tied into serving the will of the gods that created the world. Because to her, they're not abstract concepts. They are real because she knows them. And so her desire is to serve them while at the same time living her life and protecting her family and protecting her city. And her motivations are not as straightforward as Ace's. And you don't always have to come out and just say, hey, this is, I like money, I like power. Again, your readers aren't dumb. Don't spell everything out for them. Give them clues, give them hints, and help them follow the breadcrumbs and hopefully come to a good payout. So, to wrap all of this up, and I've really got to work on saying so. I say it way too much. To wrap all of this up, when you are creating your characters, you need to understand how they're motivated, why they do what they do. So when push comes to shove, when the conflict arises, they respond in a way that makes sense, and your reader will feel like it makes sense. If your motivations for your characters are unclear, then you're not going to have a clear path of how they should act in a situation, and you're going to confuse your reader. And the last thing you want, I know that this might seem odd, but the last thing you want is a confused reader. Some writers get away with confusing their readers. Most writers can't. You want to make sure that motivations and actions all make sense, and they serve the narrative, and they serve the story, and they drive the plot. Because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to tell a good story. And clear motivations backed by clear actions help to tell a better story. So, with that, I did it again. So, I'll get it. I promise. Thanks for stopping by. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me ramble on about writing. I love to write. I love teaching, and I love putting my knowledge out there for other people to listen to. So please share, give us a like, comment if you have something that you'd like me to talk about. If you don't like what I do, if you didn't find this informative, go ahead and give it a dislike. And with that, I will remind you, my website, jcbybee.com, my Patreon, and you can catch me in the next one. Have a good day.